Brothers and sisters, today we stand not as servants of foreign powers, but as partners of our own choosing. With India, we exchange our gold not for chains, but for knowledge, for machines, for the future of our people. This is not just a deal, odds. It is a declaration that Africa decides its destiny, and this is only the beginning.
In a closed room in Ouagadougou, away from cameras and journalists, a deal worth $15 billion was sealed. The players? Ibrahim, the young military leader of Burkina Faso, and envoys from New Delhi. On the surface, it looked like just another trade agreement. But here's the twist. This wasn't about selling cotton or buying tractors. This was a gold for tech pact, a trade that swapped Burkina Faso's most prized resource, gold, for India's fast-rising technology and infrastructure power. If true, this deal wouldn't just boost Burkina Faso's struggling economy, it would signal the birth of a new Africa-Asia alliance, and it would leave Western powers, long accustomed to dominating Africa's markets, stunned and sidelined. But how exactly did we get here? And why would Ibrahim bet so much of his country's future on India? To understand that, we need to peel back the layers of this untold story. The heart of this story lies in the $15 billion trade package, according to insiders. It worked like this. Burkina Faso would channel a portion of its massive gold reserves, official and unofficial, directly into India. In return, India would provide advanced agricultural machinery, digital technology infrastructure, training for engineers, and even defense equipment. This was not just barter in the old sense. It was a carefully calculated swap. Gold, a resource Burkina Faso has in abundance but often loses to smuggling and shadow markets, was being transformed into tangible progress. Roads, data centers, power grids, even smartphone assembly lines, all promised under this package. For India, the benefits were equally tempting, with global inflation rising and the dollar's dominance constantly challenged. Securing gold meant security, and gaining a foothold in West Africa, right under the nose of traditional Western powers, gave India a new strategic advantage. But this kind of bold move doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It was part of a bigger journey, one that started with rejecting old partnerships and looking for fresh ones. So what pushed him to turn away from the West and choose India instead? Ibrahim rose to power in 2022, positioning himself as the face of a new, independent Africa. From the start, his speeches carried a clear message. Burkina Faso would no longer bow to outside powers that extracted resources while offering little in return. France, the country's former colonial ruler, was the first to feel the chill. Military agreements were scrapped. Foreign troops asked to leave. Western NGOs and mining companies soon found their operations questioned, but rejecting the West created a vacuum. Burkina Faso needed partners who could bring in technology, investments, and security without repeating the old cycle of dependency. That's where India came in. Unlike Western powers, India framed itself as a fellow global South nation, a country that also shook off colonialism and built its own industries from scratch, too. That made India not just a partner but a mirror. This shift wasn't just political theater, it was economic survival. Burkina Faso had resources but lacked the machines, the networks, and the know-how to turn them into lasting wealth. And India, racing to expand its global influence, had exactly those things to offer. But if Burkina Faso was offering gold, why was it so valuable to India in this particular moment? To answer that, we need to dig into the real weight of Burkinabe gold on the global stage. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers. In fact, gold accounts for nearly 80% of its export earnings. Mines dot the country, some legal, some informal, many slipping through state oversight. This makes gold both a blessing and a curse. It enriches a few, but it often disappears into black markets, leaving the state with little revenue to show for. The $15 billion deal with India was a way of rewriting that script. Instead of watching gold flow out through shadowy middlemen, it would be directly swapped for nation-building tools. For India, the timing couldn't be better. Global uncertainties were driving up gold's importance as a hedge. Having a steady pipeline from Burkina Faso meant less dependence on Western-controlled markets. But there's another layer here, one that Western analysts picked up quickly. If India and Burkina Faso were really swapping gold directly for technology, then the transactions could sidestep the US dollar system. That might sound technical, but in practice it's a massive geopolitical shakeup. And that's exactly why this supposed deal was said to shock the West. But before we get to their reaction, let's understand how India itself benefits strategically from this alliance beyond Just shiny metal. India has been eyeing Africa for years. Its companies build railways, its engineers set up digital payment systems, and its navy sails regularly across the Indian Ocean to East Africa. But West Africa, where Burkina Faso sits, was a new frontier. By stepping in with a $15 billion trade package, India wasn't just buying gold. It was buying influence. It was building a reputation as the partner that comes with technology and training instead of lectures and conditions. This meant more than machines. It meant a story to tell his people that Burkina Faso could rise with allies who respected it. For India, it meant securing a long-term friend in the heart of Africa, right in a region where Western and even Chinese influence has been dominant. But influence isn't free. Deals like this always trigger reactions, and in this case, the reaction from Western capitals was sharp and nervous. When whispers of a gold for tech pact first surfaced, Western media dismissed it as rumor. But as more details trickled out, analysts began to connect the dots. For the West, this was about more than gold. It was about losing its grip on Africa's future. For decades, African gold and resources flowed mainly toward Western economies. If countries like Burkina Faso started channeling them toward India, it would mean a redistribution of power. Reports claimed that European diplomats scrambled to clarify the deal, while financial analysts worried about gold bypassing dollar-based markets. The U.S., already watchful of countries trading outside the dollar, would view this as yet another crack in its global financial armor. But perhaps the most shocking part wasn't the economics. It was the symbolism. A leader barely in his 40s was saying to the world, Africa chooses its partners, not the other way around. And if Burkina Faso could do it, what stopped other African nations from following the same path? That question is exactly what made Western leaders uneasy. But for Africa itself, the implications were much bigger. This was more than a trade deal, it was a possible model for the continent's future. What if more African countries struck gold for tech or resource for infrastructure deals with Asian partners like India? It could flip the script of global trade. Instead of exporting raw resources and importing finished goods at high prices, Africa could start trading smarter, swapping directly for the technology to process and manufacture at home. For Burkina Faso, the $15 billion pact could mean new factories, jobs, and digital networks. For its neighbors, it could mean inspiration. And for India, it could mean building a corridor of allies across Africa, stretching from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Indian Ocean. But perhaps the boldest part of this deal wasn't even the tech or the gold. It was the financial mechanism quietly built into it, the idea of bypassing the dollar in favor of direct settlements. If the $15 billion deal really worked as insiders described, then transactions would not be routed through dollar-based systems like SWIFT. Instead, India and Burkina Faso would trade directly, possibly in rupees, or even through gold-backed settlements. This might sound like technical finance talk, but in reality, it's one of the most disruptive moves a country can make. The dollar has been the backbone of global trade for decades. Every time two nations bypass it, the structure weakens just a little bit more. And that's where this deal becomes truly global in scope. Because if India can pull this off with Burkina Faso, what stops it from doing the same with dozens of other African nations? For the West, that's the real shock. For Africa, it's a glimpse of financial independence. And it's proof that even a landlocked nation can shake the world if it plays its cards right. So let's circle back to that quiet room in Ouagadougou. A handshake, a document, and a promise worth $15 billion. On one side, a young African leader betting on a future where his country trades resources for real progress. On the other, a rising Asian giant hungry for gold and influence. The world may never know all the details of this untold deal, but its message is clear. Africa is no longer waiting for permission, and India is no longer waiting for invitations. Together, they are writing a new chapter, one that shocks the West but might just inspire the rest. And that's the untold story of Ibrahim and India's $15 billion alliance.